Chapter 34. Jim Lane Keeps His Promise. Sammy, on her tired pony, approached the lookout on the shoulder of Dewey. As they drew near, a figure rose quickly from its place on the rock, and running swiftly along the ledge, concealed itself in a clump of cedars above the trail on the southern side of the mountain. A moment later, the almost exhausted horse and his rider passed, and the figure, slipping from the ledge, followed them unobserved down the mountain. Nearing the house, Sammy began to wonder what she should do next. With all her heart, the girl believed in her father's innocence. She did not know why those men were at her home, but she did know that the money that helped her father over that drought had come through the shepherd. And the Matthews family, too, had been helped the same way. Surely Dad Howitt was incapable of any such crime. It was all some terrible mistake, some trap from which her father must be saved. But Sammy knew, too, that Wash Gibbs and his companions, they were bad men, who might easily be guilty of the robbery. To help them escape the officers was quite a different matter. Leaving the trembling brownie in a clump of brush, a little ways from the clearing, the girl went forward on foot, and behind her still crept the figure that had followed from the lookout. Once the figure paused, as if undecided which course to pursue. Close by, two saddled horses that had carried their riders on many a long ride were tied to a tree a few feet from the corner of the barn. Sammy would have recognized these, but in her excitement she had failed to notice them. At first the girl saw no light. Could it be that the officers were wrong, that there were no one at the cabin at all? Then a little penciled gleam set her heart throbbing wildly. Blankets were fastened over the windows. Sammy remembered that a few days before, a bit of chinking had fallen from between the logs in the rear of the cabin, and she had spoken to her father about it, but it was not likely that he remembered to fix it. Cautiously she passed around the house, and creeping up to the building through the crevice between the logs, gained a clear view of the interior. Seated or lounging on chairs or on the floor about the room were 11 men. One, the man who had been with Wash Gibbs at the mill, carrying his arm in a sling. The girl outside could hear distinctly every word that was being spoken, and Wash himself was speaking. "Well, boys, we're all here. Let's get through this and get away. Bring out the stuff, Jim." Mr. Lane went to one corner of the cabin, and pulling up a loose board in the flooring, drew out 2 heavy sacks. As he placed the bags on the table, the men all rose to their feet. "There it is, just as you gave it to me," said Jim. "But before you go any further, men, I got something to say." The company stirred uneasily, and all eyes turned from Jim to their big leader, while Sammy noticed for the first time that the table had been moved from its usual place, and that her father had taken such a position that the corner of the cabin was directly behind him, with the table in front, and for her life the girl could not move. Slowly, Jim swept the group of scowling, wondering faces on the other side of the table. Then in a slow, drawling speech, he said, "Most of you here was in the old organization. Tom and Ed and me knows how it started way back, for we were in it from the beginning. Wash here was the last man to join before we was busted, and he was the youngest member too, being only a boy but big for his age. You remember how he was taken in on account of his daddy's being killed by the government. Didn't nary one of us fellers that started it ever think the bald knobbers would get to be what they did. We begun it as kind of a protection, times being wild then, but first we knowed some was a-using the order to protect themselves and all kinds of devilment, and things went on their way, 'cause no one didn't dare say nothing for it, for if they did, they'd be tried as traitors and sentenced to death. I ain't saying, boys, that I was any better than lots of others, for I reckon I did my share as well. But when my girl's mother died, way down there in Texas, I promised her that I'd be a good daddy to my little one, and since then I'd done the best I know how to. And after things quieted down, and I come back with my girl, Wash here got the old crowd, what was left of us, together, and wanted to be reorganizing again. I told you then that I'd go in with you and stand by the old oath, so long as it was necessary to protect ourselves from them that might be trying to get even for what had been done, but I wouldn't go no further than that. I don't mind telling you now, boys, though I reckon you knowed it, that I went in because I knowed what you'd do for me if I didn't. And I didn't dare risk leaving my girl all alone then. I've tended every meeting and done everything I agreed to, and there ain't a man here that can say that I didn't. Some of the men nodded and said, "That's so," or "You're right, Jim," came from two or three, and Jim went on. "You know that I voted against it, and tried to stop you when you hung old man Lewis. I thought then, I think yet, that it was spite work and not for protection. And you know how I was against going for the shepherd, and you went when I didn't know it. And as for this here bank business, I didn't even know of it till you were giving me this stuff to keep for you, and I had to take it on account of the oath. It's got to be just like it was before. We come together first to keep each other posted, and save ourselves if there was any call to, and little by little you've been led into the first one thing and then another, till you're every bit as bad as the old crowd was. Only there ain't so many of you, and you've kept me in it, 'cause I didn't dare leave my girl." Jim paused, and there was an ominous silence in the room. With his eyes covering every scowling face in the company, Jim spoke again. "But things have changed for me right smart since our last meeting, when you gave me this stuff to hold. You boys all know how I've kept Wash Gibbs away from my girl, and there ain't one of you that don't know that I'm right, knowing him as we do. More'n 2 weeks ago, when I wasn't around, he insulted her and would have done worse if young Matt hadn't been there to take care of her. And I called you here tonight because I know that after what happened at the mill, Wash and Bill would be having a meeting as soon as they could get around and voting you all to go against young Matt and his people. But I'm going to have my say first." Wash Gibbs reached stealthily for his weapon, but hesitated when he saw the dark-faced man noting his movement. Jim continued in his drawling tones, but his voice rang cold and clear. "I ain't never been mealy-mouthed with no man, and I'm too old to begin now. I know the law of the order, and I reckon Gibbs there will try and have you keep it. You boys have got to say whether you'll stand by him or me. And it looks like you're gonna go with him all right, but whether you do or don't, I don't aim to stay with nobody that stands by such as Wash Gibbs. I'm gonna side with decent folks who have stood by my girl, and you can do your damnedest. You take this stuff away from here, and as for you, Wash Gibbs, if you ever set foot on my place again, if you ever cross my path after tonight, I'll kill you like the measly yeller hound that you are." And as he finished, Jim stood with his back to the corner of the room, his hand inside the hickory shirt where the button was missing. And while her father was speaking, Sammy forgot everything in the wild joy and pride of her heart. He was her daddy Jim, that man standing so calmly there before that wild company of men. Whatever the past had been, he had wiped it all clean tonight. He belonged to her now, all of her, and she looked towards Wash Gibbs. And then she remembered the posse, the officers of the law. They could not know what she knew. If her father was taken with the others, with the stolen gold, he'd be compelled to suffer with the rest. Yet if she called out to save him, she would save Wash Gibbs and her companions as well, and they would menace her father's life day and night. The girl drew back from the window. She must think. What should she do? Even as she hesitated, a score of dark forms crept stealthily forward towards the cabin. At the same moment, a figure left the side of the house near the girl and, crouching low, ran to the two horses that were tied near the barn. Sammy was so dazed that for a moment she did not grasp the meaning of those swiftly moving forms, and then a figure riding one horse and leading another dashed away from the barn and across the corner of the clearing. The silence was broken by a pistol shot inside the cabin, and like an echo came a shout from the yard, and a voice rang out sharply, "Halt!" The figure reeled in the saddle as if to fall, but recovered, but disappeared into the timber. The same instant there was a rush towards the house, a loud call to surrender, a woman's scream, and then came to Sammy blessed kindly darkness. End of chapter 34.